You mentioned that a lot of this is happening behind the scenes. You were there. Can you tell us something, some exclusivity, what was happening behind the scenes there?
Well, these meetings happen behind the scenes. One of the things I went to was at the Climate Hub. Now, this is something they don't expect any outsiders to go to. And this is what I mean by they're going under the radar, they're going stealth, it's sort of secret. I went and sat in on a seminar about the financialization of nature. And that means these were climate activists affiliated with the UN, bureaucrats from all over Europe. It was in a pitch black amphitheater. They had a very slick production. Maybe 40 people in this room. It was at their Davos Climate Hub in downtown Davos in the middle of the resort. And they were openly talking about assigning every lake, tree, forest, river, natural asset around the world that would have its essentially own natural score, an ESG score or a asset score that a bank would basically say, you can't develop this unless the bank okays it, or you pay the proper natural balance or the financial nature. And this is a way ultimately for Wall Street and market and big corporations to control land use throughout the world. And we even have this in the United States. The Okefenokee Reserve was under President Obama, was designated a UN heritage land. And because of that, local state of Georgia in the United States can't develop or do anything to that land because the UN controls it. Well, in Davos, they were basically talking in bean counting bureaucratic language that the average person's eyes would glaze over. And this is some of the things that they do. It's this weird sort of bureaucratic language that they're talking and they're plotting and they're planning, and this is below the radar. This won't be announced. This won't require votes by the EU Parliament. It won't require votes by any country in Europe. These are the kind of things that just sort of happen based on the bureaucrats. The EU is going to love it, and the global international body, and it's based on all the UN activities. And the U.S. would be a part of this if we didn't pull out of this 1992 treaty. And we also pulled out of about 65 or more other UN-style international treaties Donald Trump did that don't serve our interests, because there's a lot more. There's the UN Population Fund. There's the UN Green Climate Fund money. There's the UN Climate Panel, the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that we were funding the scientists. So to answer your question, that's one of the examples. They're going to go stealth under the radar with a way that each natural asset's going to have essentially a bank behind it saying you can't develop this unless you pay for what we deem is the natural asset. In other words, the financial cost to the earth. You're going to have to pay us, this bank, first. And that's a way they can restrict, limit, and of course, if one of the other billionaires wants to build something, they'll waive all the regulations for them. This is not for the ruling class to have to pay attention to. And that's the way it always has been. And that's the other reason for Davos. It's a way for people to network so that they're exempt from the rules that everyone else has to follow. That's the simplest definition of Davos you'll hear.
You're talking about tokenization of nature. I had some shows we talked about this.
Yes.
That means they are building a new financial structure. When we know that yes, central bank digital currency is coming and there is a tokenization of the nature, that means they have a new space to build up a new financial structure and build up a new debts. Because now we know that we are living in a big bubble of financial debts all around the world, but they are lacking of assets for this. If they change this nature in the new asset, then it's unlimited, especially after they introduce central bank digital currencies.
Absolutely, and you also have a building, and this is one of Davos's brainchilds, by the way, is this financialization of nature, the natural assets. But here in the United States, we have now environmental groups who are suing lakes, rivers, forests on behalf of the lakes, rivers, forests, essentially saying that any development or use of those lands is violating their natural rights. So they're treating it as a human being. In other words, if you want to build a dam on a river, there's going to be a lawsuit by people representing the river saying you're violating, the river speaking, saying you're violating my rights, you can't do that. And that's ultimately where they want to go. So that and the financialization, that's a 1-2 step as a way to control development. Once again, I'm going to call it what it is. Let's call it Earth communism, because ultimately this really is so similar to what we saw under Soviet-style communism in terms of just the absolute mundane bureaucracy, the banality of evil, where every aspect of your life is essentially ruined and it's some nameless, faceless bureaucrat. That's essentially what we're describing here, whether it's, again, food production, transportation, construction, even free speech at this point. It's all for the collective good. You know, you had the mayor of New York called it the warmth of collectivism, which is a frightening thing to say after we witnessed the horrors of the 21st century. But it doesn't go away. It's just coming back in this new form, and they're not going to be as obvious. You think back to just 15 years ago. Remember? They were open. Like, we actually had votes on climate bills in the United States Congress. That's laughable. We would never have a vote on that today. They know to never put this stuff up for a vote. We never had a vote on any of the COVID restrictions. They know not to put that. We never had a vote on stay-at-home orders, on lockdowns, on mask mandates, on vaccine mandates. There was no legislator. There was no people calling congressmen. There was nothing. We're becoming more and more like one-party rule China, the West. And this is the problem that we've faced in increasing decades. The idea of allowing us to have our representatives vote on any of these consequential decisions is out the window. That's where the idea is we declare an emergency, we suspend normal rights, and this is just temporary. And these things happen, and then you have to fight like hell to get it reverted. But it's ironic that so many of the Western leaders, from Justin Trudeau to the Apple CEO to even EU leaders, have praised one-party rule China for doing it right, for not having the messiness of democracy. And I think there's a lesson in there, because they love what China has done and they would love to follow suit. And that really is ultimately part of that Davos agenda, part of the Great Reset. They want fewer and fewer people, smallest amount of people possible, making the most decisions. They don't want localized control. In other words, you're out in, Croatia, or you're in Kansas or California. You're a lowly citizen. You're not an expert. You're not credentialed. You're not a member. I didn't see you at Davos. You're not a member. You didn't go to Yale, Harvard, Ivy League school. You're not a Rhodes Scholar. Ergo, your opinion means shit to us, and we are going to tell you what to do. You don't need to vote. You don't need to lobby. And this is what we're really fighting here. And we're at, I think Trump's done a lot of good, but I ultimately think it's, there's a lot of dangers in what Trump's done as well.